And it also depends on the kind of water. So, we have salt water as opposed to fresh water here, which can bring with it some degree of preservation. And then we have the temperature of the water. So we have, for lack of a better term, bodies, recently deceased bodies who have been floating for several days now by the time the CS Minia, which was the first ship to get out there, got out there. And you have this interesting phenomenon where the core temperatures of these bodies are right around freezing, because as we know, the temperature of the water, certainly in the night of the sinking, was about, I think, 28, 29 degrees Fahrenheit. So a little below freezing, but because of the salt nature, obviously, it's still liquid water that the ship was floating on. But you've got a core temperature that's gone down. So essentially the body's under refrigeration.
Welcome to Season 3 of Titanic Talk. Nelson Aspen and Alexandra Boyd launch once again onto the digital airwaves with some very special event episodes. Here we feature stories from the independent documentary Ship of Dreams Titanic Movie Diaries and continue to explore all aspects of the iconic ship. From James Cameron's epic, groundbreaking movie to the history and legacy of Titanic herself. Actors, historians, authors, descendants, and fans come here to talk about Titanic. This is your first-class ticket to everything aboard the Ship of Dreams. Ship of Dreams Titanic Movie Diaries is distributed in the US by Freestyle Digital Media. It's now available to rent or own on Apple TV, Amazon, and many other platforms. Please be sure to like and leave a review.
I'm Nelson Aspen, and with my co-host Alexandra Boyd, we now have official Titanic Talk backgrounds. So, it's not just mugs and sweatshirts and caps when you go to Titanic Talk. You can get it. You can get your own fancy background. But so here we are, post 113th anniversary of the Titanic sinking. And of course, as you recall, we had such a marvelous time at Titanic weekend aboard the Queen Mary in Long Beach, California. And we really expanded our circle of fans, friends, experts, authors, historians, and just all around enthusiasts. And I'd had an idea for a really offbeat conversation about Titanic that didn't seem to be exploited. And fortunately, we met the right guy for the job, didn't we, Alex?
We did. Actually, I have to say, not to put any shade on anybody else we met, but one of my favorite people that I met over the weekend, there was some roister-doistering after hours in the Winston Churchill suite, which, doesn't have to be gone into. But this guest, who has so graciously agreed to be on our podcast, is a licensed funeral director, embalmer, and mortuary science educator, whose first passion has been his deep, lifelong enthusiasm for all things Titanic. So that's obviously why he was at Titanic weekend, and we got to meet him. He's a Titanic historian, which began with the ship's discovery in 1985, and his professional experience in post-mortem care has developed in him an evolution from rivet counting to the reverence for the human stories behind the sinking, which of course is what we're really interested in on many levels on this podcast. So as an instructor at a mortuary college, he teaches future funeral service professionals the technical, ethical, and emotional dimensions of death care. So we thought we'd bring him on today to talk a bit about the fascinating and often overlooked aspect of the Titanic story, the recovery of Titanic's dead in the days following the disaster by the crews of CS Mackie Bennett and CS Minia. And therefore, here for everyone is Clinton Bonelli.
Welcome, Clinton.
Thank you so much. What a warm welcome. My goodness. And I guess also, without disparaging anybody else at the Titanic weekend, two of my favorites are also in the chat, so to speak. So it was fantastic.
And here we are. So all roads then therefore had to lead to Titanic Talk, the podcast. And
I
here
guess
you
so.
Well, it's a subject that some people are uncomfortable talking about just because but that's a whole bigger cultural issue that people are uncomfortable talking about death and dying when it's the great common denominator after all. But I know from from my kindred spirit story that the person I believe I was in a past life, his body was recovered. Milton Long's body was recovered and interred, and back in his home state of Massachusetts. Some bodies were recovered, some were not. And I thought it would be interesting, especially post anniversary, when these photos, these very graphic photos, turn up online as part of the commemoration on this day in history. And they can be disturbing for a lot of people and confronting to see. But Clinton, I thought you'd be so perfect to talk about this because you are not a morbid and I mean, you are just like the brightest, lightest fellow. So, I mean, if you can just sort of address what is it that interests you about the business of death?
Sure. Well, Nelson, flattery will get you everywhere, so thank you for that. I guess the interest in the business of death, so to speak, or death care, originated because my parents owned a small business that was not even related to to death care. It was a bagel shop, but when I was
I
younger,
would
I
die
also
for a bagel.
well, you're in the right place. You're in New York right now, right? But yeah, I was on an ambulance squad. I volunteered when I was a kid, so I knew I wasn't squeamish about things necessarily. But then I did this program in 11th grade. I was a page for the House of Representatives in DC, and my roommate that year happened to have a dad who was a funeral director. So I met him and talked about it, and just sort of like the idea of my parents having a business and being somewhat autonomous and then just not being squeamish and then meeting a funeral director, I thought to myself, well, this seems like it would be a very fulfilling kind of career. And so of course I ignored that for several years. I was in financial services and marketing and sales and things like that, and went back to school in my 30s, which is odd because that's still in the future. And and then yeah, and then from there became a funeral director in Pennsylvania. Shortly thereafter, the school I went to asked me to teach there, so I did that on the side for a while. COVID kind of burned me out, to be quite
Yeah.
honest, and so I took on more teaching at the same school when the opportunity arose, and so that's kind of my primary thing right now, teaching it, and I guess since I just moved to a new area, I'm just sort of like a freelance funeral director for places that need it. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to
Oh, but
talk about Titanic.
before we merge your
Sure.
professional life with your Titanic life, give us a background as well about when Titanic became of interest to you and how it manifested itself.
Sure. My memory's a little fuzzy on this, but I believe that it was right after the discovery. I think my parents were watching the news and said, "Holy expletive! They found the Titanic." And I was about 6 years old when they found it, so I said, "Oh, what's the Titanic?" And they said, "Oh, it was a ship that sunk a long time ago, 70 something years ago at the time," and I guess I just said, "Oh my, well, that sounds interesting." Then Robert Ballard brought out the you know youth directed book exploring the Titanic, and I still have it. It's in tatters, but that's kind of how I really got interested through Robert Ballard's book and Ken Marshall's paintings, I would say. Yeah.
Everybody has their origin story. And so, yeah, because of the April 15th anniversary, you started to see on this day in histories pop up, and you would see the beginning of body recovery. And just to see images, I mean, we're immune to the shock of those images when we watch the news in 2025. But we don't see a lot of photographs like that from 1912. Was the recovery story new to you when I approached you and put my hand up and I said, Clinton, can you talk about this? Was that something that had captivated you?
I wouldn't say it was new to me. I'm definitely not an expert in everything Mackie Bennett and Minia, the two recovery ships. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly not the first thing that captivated me about the Titanic. But I would say after getting into death care, it became a little more of interest. And then lately, in the last couple of years, it seems like it's really come up, like you said, in like on this day in history posts, that sort of thing, where we the 15th comes and there's almost like this lull afterwards where we're just like, well, now we have to wait another year. So, sort of like I think American football has done, we find ways of making it relevant all year long, and it's not really hard to do with Titanic.
Yeah.
It's always easy to find something new about it. I find that the more I learn about the ship, about the people on it, the more I realize that I don't know. The more I realize I have so much to learn.
Can I
Um,
can I ask a question about the bodies? And I don't know, in your experience, obviously people die in many, many different ways, but these bodies, many of them had been in the water and frozen for days and weeks in some cases. Does that propose an issue or a problem or a different way of dealing with a dead body when it's recovered, when it comes out of the water?
Absolutely. And it also depends on the kind of water. We have salt water as opposed to fresh water here, which can bring with it some degree of preservation. And then we have the temperature of the water. So we have, for lack of a better term, bodies, recently deceased bodies who have been floating for several days now by the time the CS Minia, which was the first ship to get out there, got out there. And you have this interesting phenomenon where the core temperatures of these bodies are right around freezing because, as we know, the temperature of the water, certainly in the night of the sinking, was about, I think, 28, 29 degrees Fahrenheit. So a little below freezing, but because of the salt nature, obviously, it's still liquid water that the ship was floating on. But you've got a core temperature that's gone down. So essentially, the body's under refrigeration. On the exterior, you almost have like wrinkling perhaps going on at the extremities. So interestingly enough, you can get a situation where you've got preservation by refrigeration going on, but also preservation by a bit of like almost like mummification by this more superficial exposure to the salt water. But then you have days figuring into it. So days have gone by now. The sun, I think, was shining on a couple of those days. The temperature went up, went down again. The currents, that sort of preservation can be counteracted by like livor mortis, which is like blood settling to dependent areas, by rigor mortis, water logging. It becomes difficult to introduce embalming chemicals to a dead human body when the circulatory system is waterlogged, when the actual vessels themselves can start to collapse due to that. Um,
Was there any
yeah.
embalming that even took place that you know of?
Yes, on
Oh,
the ship, right on the
oh,
deck. Perhaps one of the pictures you might be referring to that Nelson mentioned before is taken aboard. I believe it's the Mackay Bennett because I think it shows Jon Snow, who was in this case. I think he's a Game of Thrones character, but he's also at the time one of the main embalmers in Halifax, Nova Scotia, from where the ship embarked to do this recovery mission. And the photo actually shows up on deck in open air, embalming taking place. And you
You
can tell,
mentioned to me,
yeah,
yeah, because we were talking about that photo privately, and you
that's right.
mentioned the distended abdomen. Is that correct? What does that was it? What
It's
does
an
that
old,
show?
yeah, that could be from several things. That could be from waterlogging, edema, that could be from decomposition. If you gruesomely pass roadkill on the road after a few days, you notice some changes taking place there where around here I'm in northwestern New Jersey, we have a lot of deer up here, so they bloat, especially in the summertime. That could be that. It could just be that it's an old photo and it's a little distorted. What we might not see is some sort of covering that they put to prepare the person for the photo. You'll notice in that photo that they've cleverly placed an embalming fluid bottle in front of the victim's face. So you see a person lying down, embalming equipment, you see the embalmer, you see actually somebody peering around one of the walls behind, and yeah, they did embalming right on the deck. And that was because of local laws in Canada at the time. While embalming was still pretty new, they did, they were worried about diseases coming on shore. That's why in America, we had something like Ellis Island. And we also already had rules where a body that came ashore needed to either be embalmed or hermetically sealed for immediate burial or immediate taking to a funeral home, that sort of thing. So there were requirements to do this in order for some of these bodies to come ashore.
For those of us who are laymen or didn't watch 6 Feet Under when it was on the air, uh, when you say embalming fluid, just how much are we talking about? Like, how much fluid does it take to embalm the average body? Is it a big bottle? Is it a little bottle? What do they do with? If you could just sort of explain what the 1912 version of embalming would be.
Well, now we have a machine. So, and Nelson, I'm struggling to believe that you haven't seen 6 Feet Under. I have a feeling that you would really like that show. And for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's got one of the best series finales of all time.
I loved it.
But
Yes, yes. I
yeah,
sobbed through the whole thing. It was
all
amazing.
the emotions,
Yes,
absolutely.
yes.
So a lot of things that have changed about embalming really have to do with just the introduction of electricity. So the ability to actually pump fluid through a machine that's essentially a pump with a big um, reservoir on top of it, and slowly the liquid goes down as it gets introduced into the body. And the process is that you inject these chemicals into an artery, and on the other side of things, you have the accompanying vein, which is draining the fluid. So the embalming machine's pumping fluid in and pushing the blood that's in there out through the accompanying vein. Sometimes you have to, do this in multiple places throughout the body, but ideally, we would go in through, a point at the base of the neck, and go into the carotid artery and drain through the accompanying jugular vein. And in terms of the amount of fluid, it depends. Probably a little more. I can't, I wasn't there, but probably a little more for some of the Titanic victims because you're counteracting against fluid saturation, saltwater saturation. You're trying to get the edema down. And interestingly, embalming fluids have a dehydrating effect. So they actually they can help to bring edema down. And that's why sometimes you'll go to a viewing and you'll know the person had edema before they died and they were swollen up from probably end of life sort of
Trauma?
medications, trauma, that sort of thing, and then they look so perfect when you see them at a viewing. And part of that is because of the embalming process. Of course, part of it's because of some good cosmetics as well.
And
No,
what
no.
is
Oh,
the
sorry.
embalming fluid? Is it formaldehyde? What is that what makes the fluid?
Yeah, yeah, it would have been certainly a formaldehyde-based fluid aboard the Mackay Bennett. I do know that it was formaldehyde-based. Formalin, which is a mixture of formaldehyde, methanol, and water. It's essentially formaldehyde that has this methanol in it to serve two purposes. First, it preserves the embalming fluid from going bad as quickly. In food, we call them preservatives, and it also helps to the blood to not coagulate as you're working through the embalming process. So yeah, it would have been a formalin solution, just like we have today.
Nelson, did some of your research come up with the fact that many of the third class passengers were just buried at sea? They
Well,
were,
yeah, this was
if they
this
weren't,
was
many maybe weren't even identified or identifiable for many reasons. Everyone knew to recognize John Jacob Astor and some of the more eminent people on the ship who died, but there were probably many, many people that just nobody knew who they were, which is so tragic.
That's right. Well, in in the process of recovery, and I think it's notable that there were class distinctions even in death. A lot of identify, a lot of people were identified, if not by facial recognition, by their jewelry or their monograms or what was in their pockets. My book Kindred Spirits was about a first class passenger. So he had monograms, he had paperwork on him. Uh, and because I think it's not a coincidence that because he was a wealthy gentleman of leisure, that his body was sent home for interment with his family in Massachusetts. Whereas third class passengers, maybe even if they were identified, would not have found their way home. I know there were burials at sea on board those vessels. I suspect maybe more third class passengers were buried at sea. And then, of course, there are the Titanic cemeteries where some bodies went. Uh, do you have thoughts on that, Clinton, about
Yeah. Mhm.
how class may have factored in?
It absolutely did. So, and the captain of the Mackay Bennett, Captain Larnder, actually had some words about this that both kind of make you feel like, oh, this class struggle, this was terrible, that so many more third class passengers passed away, and it's absolutely true. He came up with I guess kind of what I thought was a brilliant explanation. He said, "No prominent man was recommitted to the deep. It seemed best to be sure to bring back to land the dead, where the death might give rise to such questions as large insurance and inheritance and all litigation." And then he said, of others, particularly of crew members, that the man who lives by the sea ought to be satisfied to be buried at sea. For my own part, I should be contented to be committed to the deep. Did a little
Sounds
homework.
fishy, and I don't. That's not a pun.
Sure
That
it is.
sounds suspect to me.
But yeah, absolutely. But I mean, it's a well thought out explanation for sure. I mean, back then, some estates paid out only if there was a body. They actually had that stipulation, and they didn't have the fine print that has come with years and decades more of legal.
Families wanting their money and
Yeah,
needing to prove that,
and
yeah. Isn't it
and of
seven
trying to
years or
close
something? If you haven't
loopholes.
got a body, you have to wait 7 years, and now you can get a death certificate. But it may be
Yeah.
changed since the last dramatization of that kind of story and scene. But yes,
For a
Exactly.
burial at sea, what would be entailed? They wouldn't, for lack of, I mean, they wouldn't bother. I hate to say the word bother, but they wouldn't bother to embalm a body that they were going to commit to the ocean, would they?
Correct. No, they like, well, for that purpose, certainly not. In fact, a lot of those victims that were recovered on board the ship were buried at sea simply because they were running out of embalming fluid. They had brought a lot with them, but they were running out of embalming fluid, and then the Minia showed up, and I think another passing ship showed up as well with more fluid, and so. At a certain point, they actually stopped the burials at sea and started embalming everybody. By that point, of course, they're recovering less bodies, and they've either drifted off or just they've gone through all the bodies that were floating, because the ones that weren't wearing life vests would have gone down with the ship essentially. Alexandra is chomping at the bit.
I have a slightly different question on cause of death, which always pops up in my brain because we all talk about the freezing conditions. People passed away in 15 minutes. They didn't drown, a lot of them. They just weren't rescued in time. And my thoughts always go to the people trapped below decks. Like, say you were in the stern, you had managed to find an air pocket, you felt the ship going, we and then you plummet 2.5 miles down to the ocean floor. What
Mhm.
how did those people die? Please tell me they died quickly, or did they implode because of the pressure? Did the portholes explode and bring them to an early death of drowning? Do we have any idea? Has anybody ever discussed what happened to those poor people? That's
Well,
a horror
yeah.
story to me.
I think that you would have two vastly different, and you point out the stern. Of course, we all know that the ship broke in two as it was sinking, and that the bow sunk very slowly. So you have a lot of preservation of the wreck as a result. Not so much disturbances with that, and the stern sank in minutes. So you would expect that there would potentially be some people trapped inside, and that there might even be some air pockets. But as I think that the stern would have sunk a lot quicker, so conceivably there would be air pockets in there. We know this from forensic evidence of the wreck itself, that the stern is in such worse shape than the bow, that it had such a more chaotic descent, but also that there were implosions going on as those air pockets, were forced by pressure to be released. And so I don't think that somebody aboard the stern who was trapped there would have been suffering for very long. I think the air pocket would have very quickly collapsed, and unfortunately, the person with it, but fortunately not in a long drawn out sort of suffering way. I would hope that that's true.
That recent Nat Geo documentary, I don't know if you've watched it yet. It premiered the same weekend, but they were telling a story about the famous story of Benjamin Guggenheim getting dressed in his finest to die like a gentleman. If he had gone back to his cabin, that it would have been around the point of the break,
Mm,
and it would have been a particularly gruesome demise if you were in the part of the ship where it broke.
mhm.
So just to add one more element of horror to
Yeah.
the story.
Or if you had Fabrizio and you had a funnel just fall on your head, that would do you in very quickly.
Well,
That
I
would
was thinking
that
when
might have
Clinton
been the best
mentioned
kind of death for that scenario, honestly. Just immediate like that, certainly better than freezing, I would think.
there's in my research process about the life vests, something that I came across that I th thought was interesting, because we have this image of people trapped in the water just floating there, freezing to death. But I read that because of the way the life vests were made with the cork, that those who jumped from the ship, the life vests would have, when they hit the water, the vests would have either knocked them unconscious or broken their jaws. So it's
Mm.
enough to think of this horror, let alone to then have to be dealing with a broken jaw or being unconscious in the water when you hit. And so that
Yeah.
you made me think of that when you mentioned the embalming process would improve the edema. Is that am I saying it correctly?
Well, edema is swelling due to, moisture buildup in the tissues. So yes, embalming will certainly help with that if you're using a dehydrating fluid such as a formaldehyde-based solution. Um, it can also help to make those kinds of injuries that you're describing less apparent, so that the cosmetic procedure is a little bit easier for the cosmetician or for the embalmer who's performing that after the person's embalmed.
Isn't
Um,
that why? Isn't that why they make you put your head down between your knees if the plane is crashing? Because if the head separates from the body during the crash, it's more difficult to find the person. I don't know. We can cut that
That's
bit
what
out.
I've heard
But
too.
that
it's
That
yes, it's
you're
that it's
also
not
that
like
you if you
don't
put your
keep in
head
bind
mind.
down.
yourself. It's like no, it makes it much easier for us to identify dental
Mm,
records if your head is still on your body. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
a flight attendant also
I don't
told me
know.
that's because if your head's down, you can't see what's going on, and it's for your own peace of
Dental.
mind, so you don't panic as much. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
I've
telling you, if
heard
you
that's why
tell me
the
to put my
oxygen.
head down, I'm going to panic.
Yeah, I've heard that's why oxygen masks come down as well, because the pressure is going to change no matter what. You're going to probably go unconscious, but at least the oxygen almost gives you like the dentist, the nitrous effect. It calms you
Yeah.
down or something. But yeah, that's a little beyond my realm.
That's why they
Aviation,
pass out the nuts.
right?
Now,
Yeah.
Clinton, I understand that probably a lot of this would be supposition on your part, but if you could speak to, okay, so they've embalmed the bodies that they can embalm. We're heading back to New York or Nova Scotia.
Mhm.
What is the care of the corpses at that point? And what
At
do
that
and what do the families receive when they get their loved ones back?
Well, they did go back to Halifax, which is why the big cemetery. There are three cemeteries there that have Titanic dead. I think the one isn't it called Fairlawn, I think, or something like that. But upon arriving back, I don't have all the details, but I do know that they actually used, and this is quite ingenious, a curling arena. You know, the Olympic winter sport curling.
Yeah.
They had a curling rink, I guess, that was present in Halifax, and that they made into a makeshift morgue. It was already, cold, and there was, an ice rink, and so the bodies would have been close to the ice and able to be viewed there and at the corner and at Jon Snow's funeral home, and people would have been able to come and identify their loved ones, and if they had the means to bring them back to be buried locally to them, or they went into this one of those three cemeteries, and
Would they be undressed? Would they be wrapped in blankets?
that's they. I don't know. I would imagine that they would have definitely had a covering. I don't know if they would have been in their original clothes if those clothes were laundered on the ship. I really don't know that. That's a really interesting question, and one that I should really look into, as well as
Part two.
my interest into this expands. But they definitely would have been covered for modesty, at least in some way, and perhaps even over the head, and then the classic okay, identify your loved one scene from all the TV shows that you've seen.
Yeah.
Uh,
I imagine there are special customs or I don't know, rituals is probably isn't the right word, but different protocol for different religions and et cetera. Is that something you have encountered in your line of work, and would that have been part of the Titanic mission?
Sure. So I think a lot of those funeral rites would have taken place upon reaching shore again. However, the Mackay Bennett did have along with it a gentleman named Canon Hind, who was an Anglican minister who did perform solemn Anglican funeral rites over each set of victims. So on Sunday, April 21st, for example, the Mackay Bennett's deck actually became sort of like a floating church. Hind led the crew in prayers as they were wrapping dead bodies, and those being committed to the deep. And
You
there
know, we
is actually a photograph showing him on deck. And sailors' heads are bowed. I haven't seen it in a while, but I do know of its existence.
I have another question about the Mackie Bennett. Was it a recovery ship? Seems
No,
like no, there was an it was
didn't White
it was
Star
you
commission it?
you
yeah, it was available. CS Mackay Bennett, the CS, just like RMS stands for Royal Mail Ship, SS probably steamship, I think. CS is cable ship. So this was an early example of a ship that would maintain telegraph lines, undersea telegraph lines. I don't know if the Mackay Bennett just maintained them, or if I think they also laid cables. So as technology is advancing, but I guess they were in port when the White Star was urgently looking for a recovery ship, and I should also mention that this recovery and the meticulous nature of cataloging every victim's personal effects, every victim was given a number, whether or not they could be identified. And as recently as, say, the aughts of 2000, like the 2000s and the 2010s, we've actually been able to identify some people through DNA records for sure, but also through these personal effects. As I was sort of preparing for this, I found an old message board on, I think it was encyclopediatitanica.com, that these old messages going back as early as when the site came out around 1998, just talking about, has anybody found this? Has anybody, and oh, I found out because of this that I was related. But also remember what happened shortly thereafter. After the Titanic disaster was World War One, and then we had World War Two, and so the advent of sort of having mortuary officers and to be able to identify people, especially those who had died in battle, who might not be recognizable by their artifacts, by their possessions that they had on them, by these cataloged possessions that could then go about identifying them, was just incredible. Just like the Titanic disaster in so many ways led to improvements in regulations, like having enough lifeboats, by having the International Ice Patrol, by having 24-hour wireless communication aboard ships to prevent, something like a close ship like the California not coming to their aid. So too, the recovery efforts led to changes in how we treat our dead, especially after a big disaster or war.
Well, it
My
just,
brother was an Air Force chaplain, and part of his job was giving last rites, retrieving, from plane crashes, etc., body parts. I mean, just it's the grim reality for sure. Thinking of the memorial services that you mentioned that were happening on the recovery ships. Titanic weekend closed out on April 14th with a memorial service in the Queen Mary Chapel. And everyone was invited to share their thoughts or reflections on this moment. And it was somber, but it was also surreal, because 8 minutes into the ceremony, we experienced an earthquake, and Clinton and I were there together, separated in separate pews, but we were there together at the service, and it was a fascinating moment for sure. And Clinton, was the seed of the idea to have you come and talk to us about this, because you spontaneously got up and spoke. And so if we can sort of wrap up this episode of Titanic Talk, why you felt propelled, and to no one's surprise that got to know you over the weekend, you spoke so beautifully, and you also referenced the Jack Thayer quote that is very close to you. So maybe if you can share a little bit of that to end us on a more inspirational note.
Yeah, so I think the quote I shared, I don't remember exactly, but I think it might have been, to my mind, the world of today awoke April 15th, 1912. I actually have it tattooed right here, along with an unfinished tattoo of the ship. And I think it was really an inflection point for a lot of people. Now, for Jack, even more so, because he was 17 years old. The entire world changed for me around that age, and I didn't have a Titanic, thankfully, to experience in order for that to happen. But for him, it would have been even more apparent, because you did have this. I mean, it symbolizes in many ways the end of the Edwardian era and the beginning of, a more global sort of experience, a different kind of world. He says in his the quote as well, that before this, headlines were smaller, that even the size of the type that they used was bigger after that. That it was almost like the creation of the paparazzi, so to speak. But we've had a lot of inflection points over the course of human history, and I think that Titanic was a big one of them, and I think that among so many other things is what draws so many of us Titanic enthusiasts, Titaniacs, as I came late to came late to hearing that term, where we all came from. Um, so uh, so yeah, I think that, like I said in the beginning of our talk today, it just seems like the more I know about this ship, and the more people I meet, the more I realize that, I mean, it's like an addiction that I'm just getting deeper into. Now, what, over 35 years later since the discovery, just since I've been interested in it, and it just keeps you in. Certainly there are a lot of less healthy um, things to be enthusiastic about, though. So I'm
I
pretty
couldn't
thankful.
agree more. Yes.
And I
Clinton,
got to meet you too.
well, Clinton, thank you so much. It's been such a privilege to have you on Titanic Talk for just something that is so fascinating and interesting, certainly to me, to cover all of the aspects of this tragedy, but also to put a human aspect on it, which you're so good at doing. And we really, really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. It's been my honor to be with you again and to see the both of you, and most likely to see Nelson tomorrow in person at his book signing. Both of you have amazing works of art that you've created. Alexandra with Ship of Dreams, which I watched promptly upon my return from Titanic weekend.
Your
With
signed
Nelson,
DVD, I hope.
yes, my signed DVD. I like to use the things I have. Nelson, I'll be buying another copy of your book the
Oh
next time
boy.
I see you, because I'm mauling the one that I have.
Oh, good.
It's dropped in the lake. It's come back out and dried. I'm about
Embalmed.
85 pages in, and it's got me hooked. It's amazing. I love that we both are kindred spirits in a way in our fascination with Jack Thayer and Milton Long. How, just a month before you and I met, I was stuck in an airport for 8 hours, and I read all of Jack Thayer's, memoirs. And so it was almost like I studied when I didn't
Fresh.
realize I needed to. So it was fresh in my mind when I met you, and it was just enhanced that whole experience. And
I'll
so
leave you with
thank
this
you both.
fascinating note, courtesy of Don Lynch, who the distinguished historian who was aboard for Titanic weekend. When I was talking about Milton Long to him, and we were just talking, of course, about the recovery of clothing and personal effects on the recovered bodies. Don brought up the fact that Milton was wearing brown shoes with his black suit. And to him, that says what a rush they were in. Like that he was in his cabin and they were like, hurry, hurry up to get to your lifeboat stations. So he threw on mismatched shoes because there were not the shoes. He was wearing brown boots with his black suit, which he
Oh,
wouldn't
never,
have.
never. Not in those days.
So
No, dress
no,
properly.
no self-respecting Edwardian gentleman would be caught dead. Oh, now I just jinxed it. All right, that's
Come on.
Titanic Talk.
Thank you so
now.
much,
We love you,
Clinton.
Clinton.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review. And if you'd like to hear more podcasts like this, hit the subscribe button. For information on where you can see Ship of Dreams, Titanic Movie Diaries, go to shipofdreamsfilm.com. Titanic Talk is a production of Ship of Dreams Film Limited. We've launched a line of Titanic Talk merch. A cap, a mug, a tote, a t-shirt or a hoodie. You'll be sure to find a unique gift for the Titaniac in your life. Look for the link in the notes and on Instagram, or go to bit.ly/Titanic Talk Shop.